It is 12:30 and my dashboard says that the live stream is starting soon. And we're live. There we go. Welcome, folks. I'm just going to get a couple things set up. The chat window popped out. And make sure my mic is good. Yes, it is. Okay, gonna give a couple seconds for people to join on the stream. And what else? We'll be talking about page objects today. Still just holding off, waiting for folks to join. Hate to get started without anybody listening. Here we go. We at least have one, so that counts. Okay, I'm going to get started talking about page objects. Before I start with that, I want to go over a couple of items that we had talked about last time and ran into some issues. One issue was that the Selenium standalone service wasn't working, and I figured out why that was, and I'll show you what's up with that. Not that. Let's see. WebDriver IO Wednesday. We'll do sample here, and then I'm gonna edit my package.json file that has all my dependencies in it. And so you see, I've got this Selenium standalone service as a dependency in here, and what happens is this service depends on Selenium standalone, the NPM package, and because of a change in NPM between version 2 and version 3, it's not actually installing Selenium standalone, so it doesn't have the right dependency installed for you. So normally this would get installed when you install the service, but because of the way the service is set up, it actually doesn't. And so there's a couple of ways around this. And you see there's an issue here that was opened up that when you try to install, it requires a peer dependency, but nothing was installed. So yeah, there's two ways to do it. You can either just install it yourself by saying npm install save dev selenium standalone, or you can check out this PR that I have open to get Selenium standalone running on your to get it installed when it installs. So basically all I did, and I think this is correct, is I took out peer dependencies and just moved Selenium standalone into the dependencies section. And I'm pretty sure that's right. I could be wrong, but I tested it locally and it works. But in the meantime, if I try testing this to confirm, so I want to get the Selenium standalone service. Okay, it's in there. I'm going to run my test, and it should fail because it shouldn't find the service because it's not installed. Oh, you know, it's running. Why is it running? I may have, during my testing, got it all set up. I think I did, actually. Yeah. So what I need to do is remove my node modules and then unlink, because I had linked to unlink WDIO npm unlink. Yeah, when I was testing out that change that I made, I linked it so that I could do a local test. And now I'm going to reinstall everything. RMN is just a remove node modules alias that I have that makes it a lot faster to remove the node modules directory. It just says rm rf node modules because I delete node modules so often that I need an alias for it. But, okay, while that's installing, let me check some things. Okay, so I'll get rid of that. Yeah, so probably the easiest way is just to install it locally, which give that a second. The other thing I wanted to mention while we're here is something. Let me check my notes because I wrote it down. Okay, did that. Oh, and this is only for NPM 3. If you're on NPM 2, it works just fine. So that's another option, is that you go into NPM 2 instead. Okay, with that, if I run npm test, it should give me an error. No, why is it still working? One of those things that, hey, it worked. I don't know why. It's not supposed to work. I don't know, maybe it installed on the same one. See, it's still saying that it requires a peer dependency, but none was installed. And I don't have my access keys in there for sauce. And I don't have anything else running. Anyway, this is what you would run is npm install save deb selenium standalone, and then it would work. So if you want to use the service, that's what you can use for now until that pull request gets merged. So that's that. Okay. The next thing I wanted to mention that I started jumping into was WebDriver CSS and a fix to it. So one thing that I talked about in WebDriver CSS is the ability to use it with version 4 of WebDriver IO using a specific branch. So there's this branch in here called, oh, I wonder if it got merged in. Compatibility fix, no, it was closed. Okay, anyway, if you want, I'll probably get into a screenshot sometime because it looks kind of interesting, and see where they're at. But I did mention this this branch here, and one thing that's different about it is the way that you do your assertions. So if I go back to Wednesday WDCSS, there, you see I've got version 3 here, and I should have version 4. I don't know why that's there. Just do latest. Try installing all that. It's going to take a while again. But basically in here, you've got your test and this callback, and it you can do it this way, but with the new asynchronous style of WebDriver IO, you would basically just move this out. I'm not going to actually test this, but I just want to show how you would do that. So you're going to set the URL, or yeah, you'll go to your page, you'll set a value in a selector, and then you'll take your screenshot, and you're going to save that screenshot. We'll call it shots is equal to that, and then yeah, that's what it looks like. And then you'll expect that the shots search is within mismatch tolerance. So basically, instead of having it as a callback function, you're saving it to a variable. The same way we do this with like is selected, or any of those state commands, and then you just expect it to be true and things like that. And that way you can still have it in your CI/CD process if you'd like. Yeah. So it sounds like the new version of Selenium standalone was released. Let's see if that got fixed. Where'd it go? Anyway, awesome. So that got merged in. So happy to see that. Thank you, Christian. Yay. So yeah, all you have to do is get the latest version, and it should work for Selenium standalone service. Oh, and then the WebDriver CSS. I'm going to show one quick thing in here for people who want more information on how to do that. It is here in the Gitter chat for WebDriver CSS. You see they talked about it a few days ago. You see the example is right here with the way that they hit their response and yeah, match that up. So it's pretty much the same thing. Might be a little bit different. Yeah, image selected. Sorry, image selected. Meets here, and you just check it in there. So that's another thing. Along with that, I'll get to page objects in just a moment, but whoops, move this out of the way. I wanted to talk about the Allure reporter. I ended last time with an issue on the Allure reporter and was able to actually figure out what's going on there. And I'm going to jump back into the chat because in here there's some there was a link, or what was it, a script to run that made it work. Let's see. Allure. I'm gonna have to search. Okay, how do I search? Search Jenkins. Try that. I used, where is it? Where was it? This. I thought it was 2 lines. This, here we go. So these 2 lines right here are what was needed in order to get it working. So I'll paste that in chat in case you're, oh, I don't have enough room in chat. Basically, you would go to your local host page. Oh man, what's my Jenkins? 192, wasn't that, 166. I can't remember what the, that's that. What my Jenkins page was. Anyway, you go to, oh, maybe I can find it in here. Jenkins? No. Sorry, I'm looking at my other screen. I'm gonna go into my browser history. There we go. Okay, it was 6589. Don't create a random port number and then forget what it is. Ooh, and what's my password? No. No. Oh gosh. Good, good. That's really good. How about that? Can't remember my password. Anyway, you would go into the script area. I don't know if we talked about it in somewhere in here. You run it as a script from within Jenkins. Basically what I was trying last time, I just didn't use both. I had to use both. So that's what that is. Okay, that's all that. I got Allure working and it's pretty cool. And I don't think I can see it from here because of not being logged in. Yeah. So anyway, it worked and it was cool. Moving on. Let's jump into page objects now. Been waiting here long enough. So page objects are a really cool idea, and I'm happy to see official support for them, or like really good support for them coming into WebDriver 4.0 or 4.x. I don't know how to say 4.0 or 4.x, but anyway, it wasn't necessarily there in the past. You could do something like page objects, but it wasn't quite solidified as how you do it. And so now there's a whole page on it. This used to just say, yeah, page objects are a great idea, but we haven't gotten to it yet. But now we've got an official way, and what's really neat is that it just uses JavaScript in order, just plain JavaScript in order to get the page object set up. And I really like that because it makes it really easy for somebody who already knows how to do use object create to create a new object and extend things. They'll kind of understand the idea behind it. So people more familiar with the more object-oriented programming side of JavaScript will get this really well. And you don't have to install another dependency, and that dependency doesn't have to be maintained and things like that. So let's go ahead and try out some of this stuff. And to go with that, let's see. So this is probably the most boilerplate of all of it. I'm just going to create a new file. This is going to be my page. And everything is going to be extended off of this. And what's nice is that you're kind of creating a, you can create some reusable things. So if I had if I wanted to do a certain step before opening my, before running my test for all my pages, I could add it here. So in this step, when we create a page, it's going to automatically come with an open command. And that open command is going to basically add a slash in front of the path. So it's not much different from just using browser.url. But if you did need to do something like a login, you could add that in there, and then or like some sort of authentication, or you need to, maybe I need to set cookies before I jump into my website so that I can get admin access or something. You can do that here, and then anytime you create a new page object, it already does that for you, so you don't have to repeat that code throughout. That might not make too much sense yet, but I will get to it in just a minute. So let's save this under our sample. Test as, I think it's just page.js. Let's see. Okay, so no capital page, but I just went with capital page. And then we're going to create our login form. Sorry, not our login form, our login page object. So that's going to be saved as login.page.js. The .page isn't necessarily needed, but it does help when you're browsing through your files to see, oh, that's a page object file, and that's like a test file or something. So I'm going to change this to a capital P because I have that in the file name. This is going to load the page that you need. I think with object create, I'm trying to see node object create, if there's a certain version of node you need in order to use object create. If anybody knows that might help. I think it's been around for a while. Node version. So these are the node versions. Oh, well, it looks like absent from object create. Looks like it's been in there for a while, so I probably wouldn't worry about it. You probably won't have an issue with object create. As far as I remember, this is one of the newer features, but it's not one of the newest features, so you should have access to it. Anyway, we're gonna load our page, our main page object. This is kind of our parent object, and then we're gonna create a new object from that. So we're gonna extend the page object with this other object. So lots of objects being thrown out there. And that's going to create our login page that we can use in our test. I'm not going to get into this just yet because I want to actually show what the test does first, so that you can see kind of how it works. So here's the spec file, and I'll save it as .spec. And what's cool about this is if I go into my configuration file, under here, I can say, instead of running everything inside of spec, I can just say run anything that has a spec extension to it. That way it ignores the page and just the plain ones. And that it only runs files that have .spec in it. So that's good if you have multiple types of JavaScript files in the same directory. It makes it a little bit easier. So we've got chai. And then we're jumping into our page objects. You see here, they actually saved it in a page objects folder, and that's not a terrible idea. I don't mind that at all, but that's not what we did. So it's actually just in the same folder. I don't have to use the .js extension. Node automatically looks for that when it's doing a require, but you can add it there if you want to. It's a little bit cleaner to have it not in there though. So we have a login page. We're gonna go to open. So here's that custom command we created. And that references this. We're going to pass in a path if there is a path, but otherwise it'll just go to the root of the website that you're passing in, and then it's going to try and set a value on the username and password. This is also new, and another thing is that we're using login page here instead of browser. We can actually still use browser if we wanted to. And sometimes that might be helpful, especially if you have multiple pages, or if you have like more component objects, which is like the idea of your navigation bar isn't necessarily a page, but it is something that's common across all of your pages. And so you'd have like nav bar dot go to home. And this go to is like a custom command that you've written that's the same thing as this open, and you pass in the text of the page that you want to go to, and it does some things. So you can kind of jump back and forth between the different page objects, which is pretty neat as well. So looking through this, we're going to have our username and password, and to get to there, we'll look at the elements that you define in your page object. So before I jump into that, I just want to just make sure I've got the chat open in case anybody has any questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to add it in there, because this is going to get kind of deep into the stuff with JavaScript. Okay, so in I think ES 2015, they have getters and setters in, let's see, JavaScript, getters, setters, in objects. So this is a newer idea out there. Basically, it says when you try to access this variable, let's see, where's get? Nope. I was almost there. Here it is. Where is it? Using this, defining getting, there we go, okay. So basically when you define a variable, you can pass in a get function to it or a set function to it. And this is something that will be run when somebody's trying to either access the variable or they're trying to set it to something else. So here you see, here's an object that we have, and then inside that object it has a property of a, which is just a simple integer, and then we have another property of b that has a get function to it. And so when this is kind of strange how they try to illustrate this, because it's not necessarily that this is a property, specifically a getter that returns a plus 1. So here you reference it the same way you would reference any other property that you would in JavaScript. Where is it? I increased the text size and totally lost where I was. Okay, here we go. You access it the same way you would a, but in JavaScript behind the scenes, it actually runs this function. So it's almost like you're calling b as a function. It's just cleaner this way because you're not having to call it as a function. So that's what that does. And then the same thing goes with setting c. So if I try to set c to equal 50, it's going to take that value 50 and say 50 divided by 2 is what a is going to be equal to. So c, I think, would still equal 50, but if you do a log of a, it's going to equal 25. Anyway, it's a neat little way of just doing functions on or modifications on properties, and it makes it a bit cleaner as far as the way you write your code, and it's easier to read it. One other way of doing that is you can define some properties. So here I define a property on the D object, and the property is called year, and there's a getter that will return the full year, and then there's a setter that's going to set the full year. So I create a new date. Oh, this is actually extending the date prototype, which is kind of interesting. I wonder if this is kind of behind the scenes. You really shouldn't mess with date prototype because you could be breaking a lot of things if you do that. But for this example, when you just log now.year, it runs this getter function and it returns the full year. Now, if you try to set it to 2001, it's going to pass that into the set full year function. And then you can log it out as the full thing. So that's another way of defining getters and setters. And then the final way is, well, not the final way. One other way, and I guess this is kind of the same, is you're defining the property as an object, and that object is going to have a get. And the real nice thing about this is it's dynamic. So rather than saying username is equal to that, return browser.element username, you're passing it in, which is a little bit more verbose here, but it has the benefit that instead of having to do that, and then, instead of having to do that and then set value, you basically get to leave that off. So this is saying, go to the login page object, and then run the function called username. And that's what this would do, and it would just run this browser element. Instead of doing that, you're saying, get the username object and set the value on it. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other kind of idea. It's the same idea that you're trying to get behind it, but it's just a lot cleaner, and I like that a bit more. One neat thing that you could do is probably abstract this out so you don't have to repeat this code again and again and again. So instead of all of that, you would just have username, and you pass in a selector, and then you would pass this object into something that would take that selector and pass it into browser.element. So you could do like a page element. you just have to write that create page element command, and that'd make it a little bit cleaner. That would look like selector, and then what was it? I don't know how specifically this works, or how specifically. I don't know if this actually works, but that's kind of the idea that you could get behind it. If you really didn't want to repeat yourself again and again, you just use create page element instead, and that's going to return an object that has a getter set on it, a getter function set on it that passes in the selector and everything. So in theory that works. I'm not actually going to test it. Okay, enough of that. So those are your elements that you're defining. Go back into here. You can also override functions. So here we're overriding the open function, and we are going to basically call the open function, but this time we're going to pass in login. So the login URL, or we're going to pass that into the path. So you're calling the open function with this as the object that this refers to. So it's probably not really needed in this instance, but you really don't want to put null there. You do have to have a first argument that is going to be an object when you do the call function. And then the second one is the argument that you're passing into that function. So here that turns into be the path. So I'm passing login into the path, and that's what it's returning. So that's what that does. And then they're creating a new one called submit. That's basically shorthand for this.form.submit form. So when we look at our page object, we're going to have a submit here. That's going to do the same thing that this does. So actually I'll put those side by side. So these two are exactly the same as far as what they do. And again, this is all about making things cleaner, and it's especially important when you get like multiple steps. So you want to like submit the form, or like maybe you want to do some validation or something here, and then submit the form. That can get really verbose when you're writing your test, and it can also make it harder to keep your test up to date, especially if something like a login, you want to log into your site again and again and again for all of your tests. If you're having to write the same steps and you need to update that eventually, it can get to be a mess. Also, what's really nice is your selectors are all here instead of scattered throughout all of your tests. That makes it really handy to update. Like if there's a HTML update, you can just update it on that page object, and then all of your tests have been updated. So cool things like that. What's Flash? Flash is just an element. So these elements are just like regular WebDriver IO elements. So you can run things like get text on them. You can run things like set value on them, anything like that. And you have all your stuff in here. So that's all that. Let's see if I can actually run this successfully. Figures I didn't install Chai. Try it again. Okay, so it's going to the page. It can't find the values because I'm not actually on a page that has a login screen or anything like that. So it actually saved some screenshots, so that's kind of nice. But it tried running my items in my spec file, and yeah, that was pretty cool. So any questions on page objects? I'm trying to think if there's anything else to cover. Let me jump back into the page object page and see. Let's see, they have some examples in here that are pretty good. Yeah, so we'll have like a form object, and I'm thinking that this gets extended as well. So this is that same form object that we were looking at. That was basically the login. And then under, no. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any extensions in here, but that's fine. It just extends that main page, but you can get some cool stuff. So if you want like a more dynamic element of, I want to get the last checkbox in this list. So you have a page that has checkboxes on it, and you want to have some common functionality to all those checkboxes. Then you can say, here I'm going to define an element called last checkbox. It's not actually referring to a specific checkbox. It's just saying, if you give me a list of checkboxes, a container that has an ID of checkboxes, I'm going to grab the last child of that list, or those inputs. And then same thing with the first. I'm just going to grab the first child. And then let's see how this actually works, so you can kind of get a better idea. If I go back into the specs folder, and then I check out this checkbox, we open our checkbox page. We get the first checkbox. We check to make sure that it's equal to false and that the last one is equal to true. And then we're going to click that first checkbox and make sure that it's true. So basically making sure that when you click a checkbox, it's enabled and things like that. So a bit more dynamic in here, in that you can do the same thing for like select fields if you want to add some special functionality. This could be its own, like you could create a whole form WebDriver IO page object set that people could download and say, for forms, here's a whole bunch of added functionality on top of the base, on top of the base actions that you have for like submit form and stuff. You can have, specific selectors like first child or first checkbox and things like that, that make it really cool. And then you've got, and anybody can use that because forms are pretty common out there. So I want to see what this dynamic page thing is. Page objects, dynamic page, let's see. So button start and then finish. I think what this is, let's see, in our examples, I bet there is a page object, demo page. I bet there's an actual HTML file in here that has all of it. Site. Okay, let's search. We're going to find ID equals. See if I can find this. No. Okay, anyway, I thought there was something in here. I could just be missing it completely. I'd imagine it would be in test, but maybe it's not. So, fixtures, specs, no. These are just a whole bunch of tests for WebDriver IO itself. Nope, that's the documentation page. Where am I going? Page object. So basically in dynamic page, we're going to expect that the page loaded is equal to false. We're going to click a button, and then we're going to wait for this element to exist. So first we're expecting the element not to exist, and then we're going to wait for it to exist. And then once it's completed, once this has finished, so as long as this doesn't time out, it's going to find this loaded page, and then we can do an assertion to make sure that that's true. Jumping back into the page object for that, I kind of understand what this is doing a little bit better. Basically, there's an element on there called finish, or an ID that has an ID of finish. And when you first load the page, it doesn't have that element in there. but when you click the start button, it adds this element to the page. And the idea behind this, I think, is to replicate something that you might have with Angular site that has a loading spinner, or like a React site that has it, or some sort of dynamic site that has some sort of loading message. You would want to wait for that message to go away, or you'd want to wait for the main content to be loaded before moving on. So that's just kind of showing a way that you can do that. Okay, any questions? Please ask away if you have any questions that I haven't covered yet. I'll read through these docs to see if I can. That's what they're using. They're testing on this one. And so if I check, if I go back in here and I move my URL, my base URL, if I change that to there, this is a really cool thing that has just a ton of examples on it. So really neat for all these different things. So there's this dynamic content. Nope, not dynamic content. Dynamic loading. That's the page that it goes to. Element rendered after the fact. So this is the specific example they go to. They hit start in there, and you see it loads for a second, and then it should, yeah, pop up hello world. And if I inspect this, there is the ID of finish. So that's what you're seeing. And then if I actually go back and run my test again, assuming that I saved the file, yeah. So it should actually work this time. There we go. Okay, so I don't know if you saw that, but it actually did work. It went in, logged in with some bad values, submitted, expected that it would get the username is invalid, logged in with some good values, and then said that you're logged in correctly. So yeah, that's page objects. There is a question. So there's a question that any material to assist with making sure CSS paths are as optimized as possible. And I'm going to go ahead and plug my blog, selecting elements in WebDriver. Because I wrote a blog post about it. If you haven't read it, it might give you a good start. So basically I've got a basic HTML structure, and then in that I go through different selectors. So there's attribute selectors, there's nth child selectors. You saw that first child that was in that checkboxes example. There's text-based, so if you want to go by the text of it, you can do that. Now, there's other ways that you can test stuff out. There is a whole almanac of selectors that you can use here. So like a checked, this will check to see if there's a, if it won't check, it's gonna select any elements that are checked. So this is for checkboxes specifically. So if you want to get all the checkboxes that are checked, you would use this selector. If you want to get all the inputs that are disabled, you can use that selector. So there's a bunch of in there. You can get like empty fields and stuff like that. And what else? This is kind of a tutorial in how to test out different selectors. So if you want to try reducing down selectors to a certain bit, you can try that. So say I want to select this element. I can inspect the element. And where is it? More selectors. Okay. So it has an ID of more selectors. That's pretty handy. But say we don't have that ID. What I'm going to do is copy my selector here. And then I'll do $, Oh, look, that's all it gave me was more selectors. So it looked like it saw that it was an ID and said, okay, that's all I need for this selector. So that's all I need. Now, in this instance, if I copy this, since I don't have an ID, I'm guessing it's going to be a lot longer. So by using this $sign function that's built into Chrome DevTools, you see this is a lot larger of a selector. But this is basically Chrome saying, okay, this is as generic I can make it without it being confused with another paragraph tag out there. So this is as kind of like the least common denominator, or maybe it's the most common denominator. I don't know. Basically, this is as generic. Now, what you could do is say, you know, I know that I'm not going to have another main inside of a site wrapper, so I can just say like section p nth child 35. This says get the 35th. I think it's not 0 indexed. I think it's 1 indexed. So if you do 1, that'll get the first one. Let's see. We can test that. It should be this element. Yes. Okay. So it is based off of 1s. I don't know what happens if you add 0. Yeah. So 0 doesn't happen. Anyway, yeah, it grabs the 35th paragraph in here. So another thing you could do is, let's see. So this section, one thing that it didn't do in my selector that it built out is it didn't grab the class names of this. So instead of using section here, I could just use post content and then throw that in there, and it grabs that selector. So that makes it, you kind of have to work with it and say, okay, I'm going to start with this as my selector. And then from there, you know, I can get rid of the div. I don't really need that. I don't need to say that it's inside of a body, because of course it's inside of a body. I do want to make sure that it's a direct descendant, a direct child of site wrapper. So this is what my selector is going to be going into there. And then you can always test that out by wrapping it in the right way, $, and saying, okay, that found it. And then say you have something a bit too generic. So this is probably still going to capture the same thing. But what if I said a paragraph inside of site wrapper? Oh, it actually grabbed the very first instance that it found because I used a single $sign. If I use multiple $signs, so $signs, I think, yeah, so this is going to grab all the instances. So you might actually want to, if you're trying to find a very specific element, you might actually want to test it with the multiple $signs and make sure that it's a single item in that array that is returned. That way you make sure that you're not, your selector isn't too generic because of it, yeah, being too generic or something. So that's how I would probably go about creating selectors and making sure that everything is kind of hunky-dory without having to like, okay, I'm going to go into my test and I'm going to, okay, let's see. Here, I'm going to say input.text. So it's a class of input, or it's a class of text, input with a class of text. And then run my test and see like, okay, no, it didn't work. Well, is my selector wrong? Is my test wrong? Things like that. That kind of works like that. So another question, this is awesome. How does single element versus, or sorry, single dollar versus double dollar work? I believe browser.element returns the first one. Let's see. I'm going to go to the API. I don't know if there's one or two elements. So there's an element and then there's elements. So they kind of map up. So $sign is equal to element, and then $sign is equal to elements. And so this is going to get the, starting from the located element will be returned as a JSON, blah, blah, blah. Versus elements, which is going to search for multiple elements. So element is going to look for the very first one that it finds, and then elements is going to return an array of elements, which is kind of cool. So you could say like, I want all the inputs on my form, and then from there I think you can do things. Browser.inputs. Let me see. I'm gonna set value, and then I'm just gonna debug. Because what I should see is that both values have been set to foo, because that should match. Let me make sure. Okay, I saved it as inputs. Let's try this out. Yeah, looks like it did it. So if you see, we post out a second value. So we get our two elements. We call elements on the Selenium box, and then we clear the values, and that's part of the set value command. It'll clear it. There's an add value that will add the text to it, and so it's not going to actually clear it. And then you set the value on it. So that's kind of what, yeah, I can't read it on here because I got rid of username. Yeah, that's kind of what elements can do. So, you know, pretty neat in that you don't have to say element input 0 and then input 1 and then input 2 in order to set the value to be the same for all of them, that sort of thing. And you can do something like, I think there's like a check command. No? You can click it. So if you have like checkboxes, you could say check. Okay, that's the majority of it. If you have any more questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'm gonna end this soon. And you can do the same thing if you use XPath. I might as well show that real quick. Instead of copying the CSS selector, you can copy XPath. And to do that, you do $X, I believe. Yeah. And so that way you can test XPath. And let me see if $X works. No. So I think XPath is specific enough to where, see, inspect this. I just want to see if I can select multiple elements with that. What's that going to do? Oops. Okay, so XPath, when you check it, it's going to return an array if there's multiple elements that it found. Otherwise, it's going to return a single element. There we go. Maybe it returns an array for all of them. So that's a little bit different when you're using the XPath tester or selector. E1, yeah, it returns an array. So that's it. Everybody, thanks for listening. And one other thing that I'll plug is this idea that I have that I don't have enough time to work on, but test your login. It's going to go in and create a page object for you that will it will basically create a page object that is customized to your specific login form, because lots of people out there have login forms. What you'll do is you'll pass in your selectors that you need for like the input field and the form and the submit button and all that, and then pass in the username and password that you want to test with, and then it's going to create the page objects for you and everything like that. It's going to be very magical once I actually make it. And if you do want to read more about that, you can, as always, check out my blog on Test Your Login. I talked about it here. So if you wanted to jump into that and kind of think about it. But yeah, that's testyourlog.in. And some point in time, I'm going to get to this. But I'm probably going to write an article about testing your login first, and post it on my blog to kind of go into page objects and all that. So anyway, thanks for listening, and hope y'all have a great day and a happy Wednesday, and talk to you next week. Bye.